Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today, I'm going to be ranting about this book, the 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook. And this is the core rulebook 1. And I'm going to be talking about it because I'm really passionate about D&D. I'm wearing like a shirt that references Attacks of Opportunity. I've got that book right there, which is from 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons. The picture up here, which is from the 30th anniversary of D&D. A lot of the books I've talked about on this channel are from settings within Dungeons & Dragons, primarily, or maybe even exclusively, the Forgotten Realms. Overall, a lot of my life has been impacted by Dungeons & Dragons, and I bought this book at Coas, which in the past I've described it as a place where I can find a lot of used tabletop role-playing game books. And that may partially be because it's only a couple blocks down from Zia Comics, which also has a lot of role-playing game books, including, I think I've seen Root there, which I had right up on that little position in the past. I've seen, what's it called? Mouse Guard, I think is the name of it. Thirsty Sword Lesbians is there. New Gods of Mankind I've seen there. I've seen Dungeons & Dragons books there. I've seen a lot of books there. And naturally, that's going to cause some, people buying stuff at one bookstore. When they get tired of that book or that game, they're going to put it back into the used book system. All this to say that Dungeons & Dragons and this book is really amazing to me. My dad was from Las Cruces, New Mexico, and he started playing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons in 1979, and I have all the AD&D books that he still had in boxes in his parents' home. So I grew up immersed in D&D culture, so to speak, and so when I was in middle school, 7th grade I think, I started playing Dungeons & Dragons, and 3rd edition D&D is where I got my start. Me and my friends, we noodled around with, I want to say Explicitica Defilis. It was a small module from, I think, 2nd edition, which had a Naga as the enemy. And at the time I played a Halfling Druid and was involved in that way. But when I played my first 3rd edition character, it was a fighter. And the reason I know that the first character I played was a fighter was because I remember being able to take ambidexterity and 2-weapon fighting both at first level, just because ambidexterity was kind of needed for the other. Actually, looking at this, 2-weapon fighting didn't have ambidexterity as a prerequisite, but it did reference it in its text. It says, the ambidexterity feat reduces the attack penalty for the 2nd weapon by 4. A ranger wearing light or no armor can fight with 2 weapons as if he had the feats ambidexterity and 2-weapon fighting. So, yeah, the character I first played was a 2-weapon fighting fighter, and I had a lot of fun with that character. I think we only got to like level 3 or 4 at most, and it was mostly just fighting simple monsters like goblins and orcs, and kinda just rolling the dice, very unorganized ways of playing. And I think it was really a lot of like one person, one of my friends, the GM, had a lot of the information in his head, and he was basically running for us these games during the 20 spare minutes we had during school lunches. Occasionally we would play at each other's houses, but for the most part, more players were able to be there during school lunches, and so that's when we really played our tabletop role-playing games. This copy has a lot of notes in it, and it has a lot of like markers, like bookmarks. I'll use an example here. So this is the cover, as I said earlier, and then if you turn the cover all of this is written on. And then, as you see from that page, you turn the page a couple times, and there's a bookmark on the ability scores and modifiers. You can see that little tape bookmark here. And then a few pages further, you get to this one, and it's an orange bookmark right here. It's for the chapter on classes, and it has a lot of highlighting. You can see the yellow highlight on one page and the blue highlight on another. And you turn the page, and there's a lot of blue and a lot of yellow highlighting on this page, as well as writing in the same handwriting style as the stuff from inside the cover page. And it says first level with mod to total HP, and has a little arrow there pointing at the sentence, a character rolls one hit die each time he or she gains a new level, then adds or subtracts any constitution modifier to the roll, and adds the result to his or her hit point total. And so there's a lot of these notes in here. There's some very underlined things as well. So as an example, it's not highlighted. In this case, it's been underlined with a pen. It says, charisma determines how powerful a spell a bard can cast, how many spells the bard can cast per day, and how hard those spells are to resist. And then they also highlighted and then circled in pen, the hit die was a d6 for the bard in that gen. And I'm not certain to what degree some of these things were, whether it was a DM that had this book, whether it was a player, and whether or not certain classes just didn't show up in their setting or just in their games at all. Because the bard and the barbarian have a lot of highlighting running through it, but the cleric has no underlining, no highlighting, no marks on the pages at all. And the same mostly goes for the druid. The first couple pages of the druid section, there's no markings, but then there's markings under animal companion, under wild shape, 1,000 faces, and timeless body have both been highlighted in yellow and in blue. And so there's some classes that don't seem to have gotten any use or highlighting by the player. The owner of this book never highlighted or underlined anything in fighter, for example. Monk, there's very little. In fact, I don't see anything for monk. But then you get to paladin, and it says, so there's a star and a double highlight and underlining that says alignment. Paladins must be lawful good, and they lose their divine powers if they deviate from that alignment. And then on the top of the next page, this section says, and I don't think you can read it, but it says alignment lawful good, period. It's written period, exclamation mark, underlined, highlighted. And so whoever was playing this seemed to have strong opinions about the paladin, but not at all about the monk, the fighter, or the cleric. Then you turn the page, the ranger is heavily underlined, but the rogue has nothing, the sorcerer has nothing, the wizard has nothing. I think really this must have been a player who really loved certain types of characters, probably the charismatic sort, because the bard and the paladin are so heavily underlined and highlighted and have notes in their margins written about them. But then there's other ones like the combat basics page. And as you see there, there's instances of both blue and yellow highlighting, underlining, circling it in pen. There's a sticky note on one of these pages for weapons. One of the things that really makes me chuckle about this is, and like I said, whoever had this must have been favoring bards and paladins, and probably paladins, to be honest, because there's no highlighting at all in the chapter on spells. There is no margins, there are no marks. There's a lot of interesting art that never made it into the 3.5 player's handbook. There's a lot of like examples. So this art here is for the spell Leomund's Secure Shelter, and it has a diagram on the windows in the shelter. There's a table in the center. There's 4 beds against 1 wall. There's a desk and a fireplace and a door. And according to this spell, it makes a 20-foot square shelter for 2 hours per level. And so to be able to cast it, you have to be at least 7th level. And so it has to last at least 14 hours or until it is dispelled. Overall, there's just a lot of really interesting things. So as another example, here's another diagram. This one is for Fireball. It says 20-foot spread, and then it shows how this fireball would spread around corners. It shows that if the point of origin is here, it's going to go around those walls and affect people inside this building, but it's not going to affect someone who is just distant outside of the fireball's effect. So another part is that it also shows that this person who is fully around the corner, like the fireball's here, they're around the corner and are still getting affected by the fireball. So yeah, it's just a really interesting book. Some of these pictures and diagrams never made it into the 3.5 player's handbook, or at least as far as I've seen. I don't know if the PDF versions that I've seen are different from the hardcover editions that I've seen. I can't imagine they would have less art in one than the other. Another thing about this is, here is a relic that shows how old this book is. It comes with a CD pouch, and I had to ask some friends online, but it sounds like when the 3rd edition launched, it had a character builder that you could access online and somewhat install, and you could use it thanks to the access from the CD you bought in the player's handbook. This is probably the first printing of D&D, very early in its lifespan, because additional printings didn't have one section in the back that really indicate how old this one is. It says in the back, after page 286, the 2000 survival kit. And it says, you've pored over the spells, played out the combats in your head, and dreamed up 1,000 new characters. But the player's handbook is only the first of 3 core books for the Dungeons & Dragons game. The Dungeon Master's Guide, available in September 2000, gives the DM all the tools to create and run fantastic D&D adventures. And the Monster Manual, available in October 2000, offers more than 500 fair and foul creatures. But until you've got your hands on those books, you can put your new D&D characters through their paces with the monsters, magic items, and rules we've provided here. Consider this final chapter a temporary substitute until the Dungeon Master's Guide and Monster Manual are available. We've condensed many of the rules, and we've had to leave a lot out. But what remains should give you enough to start D&D adventures of your own and give you a taste of what's to come. This book doesn't say anything at all about when it was printed, but just given that information, given what I know of 3rd edition, this had to have been one of those very early printings, probably the first printing, because the 2nd and 3rd printings of this book don't have this section at the end. There's an additional warning. It says, fair warning, not everything you'll find in this chapter is exactly the way it'll appear in the Dungeon Master's Guide and Monster Manual. Some rules were condensed, simplified, or omitted so the rest would fit, and as this chapter is being written, substantial changes are still being made to those 2 books. Information in the Dungeon Master's Guide or Monster Manual supersedes information in this chapter. And then it says, Beyond the Dungeon Master's Guide and Monster Manual, you can look forward to the Sunless Citadel, an adventure that takes beginning characters into an underground forest full of menace. And I don't know if that's poorly edited or I've just never run or played in that portion of the Sunless Citadel. But the part I recall was that it was in a fortress, not a forest, that it was a tower underground. But that may just be because I never advanced enough in that dungeon. So there's some interesting stuff here. It assumes that you're only going to be playing to about party level 10. It gives stat blocks for ghouls, ghasts, goblins, gelatinous cubes. Weirdly enough, the monsters start relatively alphabetically. There's a red dragon, and that's literally the only thing that comes alphabetically before G in this section. But I also know that it is how they intended it because it goes straight from pages 3 to page 4. I'm not missing any pages in this book by the look of it. And lastly, there's kind of a do-it-yourself dungeon section here that says, want to try out these new rules? Here's a rudimentary dungeon suitable for 4 first and second level characters. And it gives you roll 18 times on the table below, write down what you get each time, note that this will leave 8 empty rooms. And then if you rolled a trap above, determine what kind of trap it is below, and you roll a d6 for that. And lastly, this is that page. And it starts in one corner, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it goes through until eventually you get to 26 rooms in this dungeon. So the Player's Handbook, this is a very early copy of the 3rd edition Player's Handbook, and it's one I probably didn't play this printing. I probably played one purchased a few years later, but I really loved and still do love 3rd edition, though mostly I play 3.5. This book is really fascinating because it gives a glimpse, a window into what came before. And nowadays you can find PDFs of everything on the internet, but this is just a fascinating gleam into what it looked like when it was coming out in 2000, which is now 23 and a half, 24 years ago. And then lastly, there was a little this thing in the book when I picked it up off the shelf, and it's a Marvel vs. Capcom Fate of Two Worlds little information page here. It gives example attacks and special moves and hyper combos for Dante and Daredevil. So pretty interesting stuff. It's always fun to find those little pieces of paper or bookmarks or notes in a used book. And this being Dungeons and Dragons, the same edition of Dungeons and Dragons that this picture is from, and seeing a lot of those similar characters, it's just, this is a gold mine for me. And I hope that you can tell just how enthusiastic and excited I am about it. I do not think I will be using this book specifically for any games, but it's one of those collector's pieces that I just want to hold on to. And what really makes it interesting to me is that whoever owned this copy never wrote their name in the book at all. So all I have is a nameless stranger's notes in a book I bought at a used bookstore 23 years after this edition came out. So yeah. Anyway, that is today's rant. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to this used book rant.